Is Yu-Gi-Oh! Too expensive? Well, the answer might not surprise you. What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now, today I wanted to do a discussion posing the question, is Yu-Gi-Oh! Too expensive? I stumbled across an article related to Magic the Gathering not too long ago, and in this article, it was actually really interesting. I'll actually post it in the description if you want to take a read, and I'm going to be citing it a lot, so you might want to read that first, actually, before even watching this video. But in the article, the author goes on to basically analyze the prices of the decks in the standard format of Magic the Gathering and comparing it to the other card games like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Hearthstone, Force of Will, a bunch of other card games, really to see kind of how they fare in comparison and what the prices look like. So I wanted to kind of take that idea, but also pretty much come at it from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Player's point of view, because I think this is a really good discussion that we could really get going down in the comment section. So in the article, the author cites how, Magic the Gathering in the current standard format is in one of the cheapest states that it's currently in. If you want to play Magic in the standard format, which is like our equivalent to, playing an advanced format, it's pretty much the most commonly played competitive format, you're looking at about $250 to $350 if you want to build a competitive meta deck. Now, obviously, there's exceptions like there is to any card game that you can build for cheaper, but I'm going just strictly on the baseline of competitive meta decks that are going to do consistently well. Now, if you look at Pokemon, he mentions that Pokemon is extremely cheap because for a competitive meta deck in Pokemon, you're only going to have to pay about $150 to $250 for, a top tier deck. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a complete anomaly because if I were to tell you that you could play Yu-Gi-Oh!, I mean, especially if you're a competitive player, if I told you that you could play Yu-Gi-Oh! For $250 to $300 competitively, compared to the shit we're dealing with now, that sounds like the fucking dream, because if you want to currently play Yu-Gi-Oh! On the competitive level and do well, or if you look and see what's having the most success, the decks are like at minimum like $400 to $500, and then depending on what you're playing, it can be upwards of like $600, $700, even $800, and that's not even counting if you're factoring in like stuff like max rarity. I'm just talking like bare basic, like just getting the cards you need to play. And that's just absolutely crazy because by comparison, that's almost a factor of 2, even 3 that you're multiplying it compared to having to play something like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon. And that just seems really insane to me. I was looking at, some of the top Magic cards that are being played in the standard format, and if you actually go and take a look at them, the most expensive cards that you need if you want to play, the most individual single card that is worth the most value, get ready for it, is a whopping like $23. Holy shit, $23? How am I ever going to be able to afford that? That's the most expensive, and sure, they also have like other $20 cards, even $15 cards and $10 cards. Like, oh my god, what the fuck are we supposed to do now? Maybe some of these Magic players should take a look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Market, because if you currently want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively, you're gonna have to shell out $80 a copy for Dragonic Diagram, you're gonna have to shell out $60 a copy for Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, you're gonna have to shell out $40 a copy for Barrage, and I feel like Barrage is probably the best example here because Barrage is primarily used in every single deck. Now, Ash Blossom probably is to an extent as well, but Diagram is more niche, but it's more expensive as well. But Barrage primarily is being used in every single competitive deck right now, solely because of the Zodiac engine. And it blows my mind that a card like that is $40 and is still just miles ahead in terms of value than the most expensive Magic the Gathering card that's on, the same competitive level. That's just insane. And so now I really want to delve into why that is. So In the article, the author starts talking about the masterpieces or the expeditions or the invocations. And for those of you who don't know, these are special cards that are only one in every, I believe it's like one in every 3 boxes of Magic the Gathering, and they're pretty much like your money cards. So these cards are already, you know, cards that you are readily available, but they're just very nice, high-end, like high rarity versions of cards that already exist. And so these cards demand a high value because of their scarcity. So his argument is that because these cards had such high demand, players were opening so much of these sets that contained these rare cards that it pretty much created a surplus, and by creating this surplus, there's a ton of supply, which means that the prices of the Magic the Gathering cards for the competitive level are actually really cheap because there's just such excess available on the market that it's keeping the prices low. And that made me think, Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of is, there's not really that same thing anymore. You know, we used to have ghost rares, which were like one in every case, and we also used to have ultimate rares, which you only got maybe one per box if you were lucky. Or even back in the day, when there was ultimate rares of every single rarity. Sure, it was kind of bad to get some of those, but at least, you know, there was kind of reason to go back to these sets and open them, because think about like when Black Horn of Heaven became meta relevant and everyone was wanting ultimate rare Black Horn of Heavens. Everyone flocked back to Cyberdark Impact, started cracking packs in hope of opening those ultimate rare Black Horn of Heavens. So that's proven right there that by doing that, there creates demand when a card like that becomes valuable. So it makes me question that it's weird because in Yu-Gi-Oh!, even though we had something very similar, it never really forced the price down of these cards, because even if you look back to when Stardust Dragon first came out and when we still had Ghost Rares in sets, people were cracking hundreds upon hundreds of cases to get these cards because it was only one of per set, and in addition to that, it wasn't like, you know, anything really spectacular. Maybe at the beginning when it was Stardust and Black Rose, but then after that, the Ghost Rares started just becoming really bad and weren't really that desirable, so people weren't really incentivized to open more of this set, and that pretty much kept the prices exactly where they were. Now this leads into my next argument, which this is where Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of other card games differ. So a lot of other card games have a set rotation, and for those of you who don't know what that is, essentially Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, hell even Hearthstone have a set rotation where they only use cards from certain sets up to a certain point. So I believe what they do is they use cards that were released in sets within the past 2 years, and then when a new set comes out, the old set gets rotated out and you're no longer able to use those cards. So that's something that a lot of other card games do, and what Yu-Gi-Oh! Does is we're allowed to use everything. That's essentially equivalent to like what Modern does in Magic the Gathering. So it's a completely different way of handling the game, but does that actually affect why we have card prices that fluctuate so erratically? Because if you have set rotation and you know that certain cards are going to be rotated out at a certain point, that means that the value of them can't really exceed a certain level because they're going to get rotated out eventually, so there's always going to be that fear, and there's always going to be a healthy supply in the market, essentially of people trying to get rid of them knowing that they're going to be gone. But at the same time, I don't exactly know if I'm a fan of a set rotation in a game. I personally like Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of the fact that we have this massive card pool, and we're able to, you know, sometimes find these really old cards that have relevance in formats maybe 5, 6, even 10 years later, again, using Black Horn of Heaven as another example, and then they suddenly pop up. And then it's really cool because it's a card you never thought was going to be applicable, but now it's really powerful. But the problem with that is by having the card pool being so vast, this means that some people can take advantage of that, buy out all the market, force the price up extremely high because now there's low supply, extreme demand, and that's going to force people to have to pay exorbitant prices for some of these cards. Whereas if we have a set rotation, those cards aren't going to be applicable in any way, at least in the standard format. They're not going to be applicable, and then at that point, it's going to keep the value on them relatively tame by comparison. Now, the last point I want to discuss is the extra deck, because I feel like the extra deck is something very unique to Yu-Gi-Oh, but also very unique in why this game actually can be as expensive as it is. If you look in history's past, you know, ever since we got Synchro Monsters and Xyz Monsters, the extra deck has actually been a cornerstone for some of the most expensive cards in the game. You know, you look back during Dragon Ruler format when we had Draco Sax and we had Big Eye, and then you look now, I mean, Daigusto Emeralds are hitting like $50 a piece. Like, then you have like during the 2014, 2015, around that time when Exciton was like a $90 secret, 101 was a $50 to $60 card. You know, all these different cards, but because they were such staple generic cards that so many different decks could take advantage of, it actually kept the prices extremely high. And I feel that because of the extra deck's existence, it's always something that's going to demand a big chunk of capital if you're going to want to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! We're actually at a time currently where the extra deck isn't as expensive as the main deck, because now we got cards like Diagram and Ash Blossom and even Barrage pretty much dominating and just really just showing that the main deck has so much more potential than the extra deck, and we're really just using the extra deck more as a toolbox with the Zodiac engine. But back then, like, the extra deck has just been so expensive. You know, you had to have multiple copies of Draco Sack and sometimes multiple copies of Big Eye. And there's a million other examples I can talk about as well, but primarily speaking, the extra deck has always been more expensive than the main deck. And because it's so unique to Yu-Gi-Oh! And because a lot of the cards in the extra deck are so generic, and they always have some application in some form or another, the prices on these extra deck monsters usually maintain some good value and always demand some sort of investment if you're wanting to play whatever deck it is, whether it's relevant or not. The extra deck monsters are usually going to retain some value. Exciton Knight is banned, yet it's still like a $20 to $25 secret rare. So, because people know if that card ever comes off the ban list, like, it's just going to be off to the races, everyone's going to be buying it out, and it's going to become like an $80 card again overnight. So, overall, it was a really interesting article, and I really just kind of wanted to throw my hat into the ring, so to speak, in discussing why, you know, is Yu-Gi-Oh! Really too expensive? Compared to some of these other card games, I really do think it is, but I'm really just wondering if Yu-Gi-Oh! Was more so a victim of design and circumstance in the way that the game has been created, but there also is, you know, you could argue the secondary market as well that pretty much buys out all these cards, but you could also make the argument that other games have the secondary market, so is Yu-Gi-Oh! Unique in this aspect? I mean, there's so many different ways we could go about it. I'd really love to hear your guys' responses down in the comments below, so please let me know. I think we can get a really good conversation going here. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. And if you like this video, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.